Welcome to the Women Changing the World podcast, a podcast on a mission to bring you some of the most amazing women I know who are doing incredible things to generally make the world a better place. From corporate sustainability to straight up magic and everything in between, you'll meet the real life humans who are birthing the new. I'm your host, Liz Best, and I'm here to amplify the stories and voices of women who are changing the world. Today, I am over the moon to sit down with Melanie Conover, who is a mindful consumer coach, a Remake Our World ambassador, and a clinical social worker. She is a total badass who is working to empower people to make more mindful consumption choices and working on tons of different fronts to address trafficking and human rights violations. So excited for you to hear my conversation with Melanie as we go deep on global supply chains and what you as an individual person in the world can do to address forced labor and human trafficking. To have you here, Melanie. This is the total dream to get to sit down with you and talk to you about all sorts of things, from your story and how you got to where you are today, to what mindful consumerism is, to what the average person can do to address human trafficking and exploitation in their daily lives. So I have so many questions, but maybe before I get into all the questions, I would love it if you'd be willing to maybe just briefly introduce yourself to anyone who's listening.
So I am Melanie. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I am a social worker and a mindful consumer coach. I work as a social worker with women in human trafficking and exploitation, and prostitution and addiction. And then being a mindful consumer coach, I get to coach people on not only how to be a mindful and conscious consumer, but mindful consumer coach, I get to coach people on not only how to be a mindful and conscious consumer, but also on how to be a consumer activist through advocacy for worker rights, particularly in the fashion industry. So I do a lot of different things, but those are the main two.
Awesome. I know. I think it's so interesting, the combination of your social work, work and background, as well as this work on the more mindful consumer coaching side of things. I'm curious if you would be willing to share your story and how you got to be where you are today. And I would really encourage you. Often I think, especially in situations like these, it can be tempting to tell us the short version, but to actually tell us like the long version. How did you come to be involved in working on these issues?
Yes, I would love to tell you the story. So, I first learned about human trafficking my senior year. I had done a little research paper on it, but then I didn't really think much about it. After that, I think I was like super sick while I was writing it, and I didn't really absorb all the information. I remember thinking, like, this is really awful, but then kind of just didn't think much about it for a few months. And then my boyfriend at the time had brought over a documentary about trafficking to watch, and it was just really heartbreaking. And it was specifically about sex trafficking globally. And then I already didn't really know what I wanted to do in college, but this kind of just gave me a mission, I guess. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I just wanted to figure out how could I help end trafficking. So I went to school and decided like, well, maybe if I'm a missionary. So I started in their program that was technically an intercultural program, and decided I hated it and I did not want to be a missionary.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I had no idea that you initially went to school thinking you were going to become a missionary.
Yes, yes, it's an interesting story. But yeah, I ultimately just, was like, nope, this isn't for me. So I stumbled around a lot, went into sociology, my sister suggested social work, and I actually had I had taken a test in high school, my senior year, like a career test from like this psychologist who was apparently amazing. And I went and met with that person, and they told me like I scored on the test like the highest in social work. And they told me like I scored on the test like the highest in social work, but I was like, I don't know what that means. And my parents were like, you're not going to make money doing that. And I was like, cool, I'll be a missionary, which will make even more money than a social worker. So, um, so then, anyway, fast forward to me choosing social work, started in sociology and realized there's no social work degree at that school. So I was from Ohio. That school is in Tennessee, and I decided to transfer to Ohio State my third year to study social work. So I started to just search out any anti trafficking organization, any anti trafficking work going on in Columbus when I transferred to Ohio State. Um, and I just met with random people. I just was like, who can I meet here? How can I be involved? I was very intent on figuring out, how can I be helpful within this community and just learn as much as I possibly can. Um, and then I just kept volunteering. I kept finding my way to people, kept kind of interviewing people, getting involved, and then I don't know. I just found myself within the anti-trafficking community in Columbus. Um, and so then I graduated with my undergrad degree, uh, got married, and then did a few internships with anti trafficking organizations. One was in Washington, D.C. Yeah.
Awesome. So you were interning in DC after college, and working on anti-trafficking, and then where did you go from there?
Yeah. So I actually think maybe I should back up because work, which was where I learned about, conscious consumerism. Um, so can I back up from there? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll say you graduated, you got married, and then you took a couple internships, including in New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the internships that I did was actually, um, between my junior and senior year in college, so, and undergrad. So that was in New York City, and that is where I learned about, conscious consumerism, and that was just a life changer for me. From there, I just haven't been able to, um, not think about, where my things are coming from, and that is really when I started to shift my lifestyle. I learned about how human trafficking and exploitation, has to do with being a conscious consumer, with my food and my clothing, and pretty much, the same, than before that internship. Um,
And can do you mind telling us, for anyone listening who either is not as familiar with conscious consumerism, or who may not be like fully aware of like what all human trafficking entails? Well, I guess one, how like what gave you that light bulb moment in New York? Like how like what was the moment? And then two, what is human trafficking for anyone who's maybe not familiar?
yeah, so in New York, I lived with, gosh, I think it was 10 other interns from, all around the country. And we were there because of our, collective interest in anti trafficking work. There, I interned with an organization called Novi Network. And they work directly and indirectly in Cambodia and India. There, I interned with an organization called Novi Network, and they work directly and indirectly in Cambodia and India with women at risk of sex trafficking. And that's where I guess like I put the two together, um, because they were working with women who it wasn't just trafficking, which is a form of labor trafficking, but um, they were also helping them to earn a living making things that we would sell here in the States. And so then that was kind of connected for me to my own lifestyle. I started thinking more about it. One big reason is because the person who was leading my internship taught us about what it means to be a conscious consumer, which at that time he kind of, buying local, buying green, organic, buying fair, meaning that the people who we buy from are being paid a fair wage, and free, that the people that we are buying from, or the brands or whoever we're buying from, whoever made our things, are also free. And that really was kind of that light bulb moment of like, I've never thought past, buying something. So learning that, acronym log off was a mind changer. He would teach us to go through the grocery store and think log off, as he would say, to think log off. Um, and that really affected, how I looked at stores.
Totally, totally. I can imagine. So just to recap, for anyone who's like trying to write this down, log off is local, organic, um, oh, local,
Organic,
or okay, local, green, organic, fair, and
fair, and
free.
free. Yeah, I think it's confusing because the LO is local. So
Gotcha,
log off.
gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. I went through that program, got that, light bulb moment, and then, left that internship at the end of the year, and just really couldn't think of anything else. When I went to the store, my mom and I had a hobby of just going to the mall and buying things, and I just couldn't anymore because all I would see, was faces and stories. Um, and it was a tough transition, uh, because, that meant, not being able to do the things that you used to do, not being able to bond with people like you used to. But I really had this drive to live, as, the person who led my internship, to live slave free.
Oh, that's so
Drive to live, as, the person who led my internship, to live slave free.
Oh, that's so powerful. And so then from finishing up that internship in New York and having this kind of awakening to what goes into, all the stuff in our world, where did you go from there?
From there, I finished out my senior year. I actually internshiped with a local organization called She Has a Name that I still volunteer with, in Columbus. And I learned a lot there too. I worked with some survivors directly and helped to develop a human trafficking 101 training for the community that they still do in the community. It's awesome to see how many hundreds of people have gone through that. And I graduated, and like I said, I International Justice Mission in Washington, D.C. I got married, and then the next year I went to grad school for social work and got my master's. Um, and that year, I had another internship with women um, within the court system who had been convicted of solicitation or prostitution, who also 100% of them had substance use disorders. So I worked in the courts with them through a specialized docket called Catch Court. And that was also a really life changing moment for me because up until then, I hadn't worked with that population directly. And it really kind of shifted my view. I had no idea that there were so many women in Columbus who were not just in sex trafficking, but were also addicted. Population would also have addictions. And so that was a really big life changer for me as well.
Totally, I can imagine. And I think so often when we hear the like phrase trafficking, we think that it happens somewhere else, but it's very much something that is real and that is happening in, many communities around the world and in this country.
Yeah. And I think I forgot to tell you, what human trafficking is and give a definition for that. So a lot of people call trafficking modern day slavery, which is kind of a dated phrase, but essentially, human trafficking involves force, fraud, or coercion. That is the legal definition. And so, yeah, it's anything. It doesn't matter if somebody is being, moved from place to place. Somebody can be within the same city being trafficked. It's more about the force, fraud, or coercion. Can be within the same city being trafficked. It's more about the force, fraud, or coercion rather than if they're being moved from state to state. Um, and victims of human trafficking can look like anyone, but they're the population in Columbus that are sex trafficked are often, like I said, women who have addictions, who have been coerced by male, typically a male like drug dealer, or sometimes we call them pimps, but they're traffickers who make them feel like they're loved, and then just exploit them in their relationship, telling them, if you loved me, you would do this for me. And then also, uh, often with drug dealers, it's like, if you for you, and if you do this date, then I will give you, this much drugs or whatever. um, and so that's kind of what it looks like here, but it really varies throughout the country and throughout the world what human trafficking looks like. um, and human trafficking is not the same as exploitation. um, Exploitation can happen without it being trafficking, which can be kind of confusing. But is if it involves force, fraud, or coercion, then it's human trafficking.
Oh, so awful. But thank you so much for providing the definition and for explaining what it can look like. I mean, I know that one of the issues that you're really passionate about is trafficking and exploitation, both of them in the garment supply chain. So I'm not sure if now's a good time for you to tell us a little bit more about what that can look like in the garment supply chain, and then we'll come back to how you got to where you are.
Number of ways within the garment and textile industry, but yeah, I'm trying to think of even where to begin on that. I guess what I ask people to think about first when I talk about this is to just wonder for a second about who made the shirt that they're wearing, and if they've ever thought about um, who who picked the, let's say it's a cotton t-shirt, who picked the cotton fibers, who weaved them into the material, who cut and dyed the shirt, who sewed it, or also, how did this tomato or whatever land on my plate? What was the process for it to get here? Who picked it? Who planted it? Um, and so I think, not a lot of people ask those questions, but a lot of those people, I think, not a lot of people ask those questions, but a lot of those people we found, especially this year, are not paid a living wage. Also in the States, not just, globally, we have to think locally as well. So I guess a big thing kind of to talk about is what a living wage is. And it's something that it's a wage that includes enough to pay for, basic things like food, water, housing, healthcare, transportation, and also like discretionary earnings, like savings. Is it enough for savings, for clothing, for education? And so when somebody is not paid a living wage or even a minimum wage within their own country or state, they are exploited. And one big example of not having a safe working condition, they are exploited. And one big example of not having a safe working condition was the collapse of Rana Plaza, which was a factory in Dhaka, Bangladesh in 2013, where over 1,100 people died. Um, there were clear signs of like cracks in the foundation, but the factory managers forced their workers to go to go into work that day, and that's when the collapse happened. Um, and so people are exploited for a number of reasons. There's some sexual harassment and sexual assault that leave people kind of stuck in their jobs because they're then kind of blackmailed. It looks, so many different ways, but we just don't tend to look at, exploitation that can happen in other industries, and especially within the garment industry.
Risk here too, for anyone listening who's familiar with the living wage conversation, is that the minimum wage does not equal a living wage necessarily. And so, just because someone is being paid the minimum wage does not actually mean that they are being paid a living wage, that those are two different concepts. And I think, a lot of the work, Melanie, that I know that you do, both like just as a consumer, as an activist, as a coach, is advocating for a living wage, not only for that bare minimum legal minimum wage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think we see that argument within the US as well, in different areas, is the minimum wage even allowing people who are low income receiving that minimum wage? Is that even allowing them to, do normal activities for themselves and their kids? Are they to go to school? Do they have enough money for transportation? Do they have any money for savings? I think we're having that conversation here in the States more than we realize.
Definitely, definitely. I think it's about time, for sure. I think it's definitely been part of the narrative. Well, so I know in terms of your story, I think where we last left young Melanie was at Catch Court, and I know that you've done some very cool things since then. So, do you mind kind of filling us in on the rest of your journey up to today?
So after I graduated with my master's degree, I started working at a treatment facility for women in Columbus, Ohio. So that was called Amethyst, and I did therapy groups with them, and just learned a lot about what addiction and exploitation and trafficking looks like. Not all of them. I did therapy groups with them, and just learned a lot about what addiction and exploitation and trafficking looks like. Not all of them had been trafficked, but a good amount of them had been, even if they hadn't really realized it in their story. Because at the time, you're not really concerned about labeling yourself as a survivor of human trafficking. You're just kind of trying to find your way through addiction and recovery. And then from there, I left Amethyst to work at a local hospital called Mount Carmel. They have a program called Mount Carmel Crime and Trauma Assistance Program, which is a really awesome program that I love so much. They provide free trauma counseling to the Columbus community, and not just Columbus, but throughout the state. And they have amazing clinicians who are getting ongoing training in trauma. Um, and they also serve a large part of the population that they serve are survivors of human trafficking, um, or sorry, I'm going to go back and say part of the population that they serve is human trafficking survivors. Um, and so I had learned just a whole lot more there about trauma. Um, Gosh, yeah, just learned so much more. I thought I was, educated in trauma as a baby social worker, but learned even more from the clinicians there and all of the education that I was able to get from Mount Carmel. And then I recently left there and now have a job that I begin next next week with Sanctuary Night, which is an organization that now provides a drop-in space called Sanctuary Night on Monday nights, and has for about 2.5 years. I've volunteered with them for a while, and now I work for them. So it's kind of where I am right now.
So exciting. That is so great. And what specifically are you doing with Sanctuary Night?
So, my title that we decided upon last week is the Director of People and Culture. So, it's kind of what it sounds like. I will be working with people. And that means that I get to work with the survivors who might come to our drop in night and soon to be in construction drop in center, as well as work.
Call out the fact that it's also like very heavy work. A lot of the work that you're doing is hard, and it sounds like, very emotionally like you are in it. How do you take care of yourself while you're doing such intense work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a lot of support um, from my friends who um, are also, a lot of them are social workers as well. So they kind of get it. Um, I have a lot of family support, and then I also have a really great therapist who is just, uh, yeah, she gets it as well. So I try to surround myself with people who are really supportive, who will listen to me. And I also try so hard to take care of myself, to learn what rest looks like. And yeah, to figure out so hard to take care of myself, to learn what rest looks like. Um, and yeah, to figure out how do I fill myself up, and that changes and has changed throughout my life. So I really just try to listen to my body and listen to, yeah, my body, mind, spirit, to figure out, what do I need in this moment? How am I feeling? Um, and how can I prepare for the future where I know, especially in this job, I will encounter a lot of tragedy because not everybody makes it on the street. So, yeah, I'm still constantly figuring that out, but, I think I've come a long way since I first started.
Totally, totally. Well, it sounds like you do have such a beautiful support system. I feel like behind like every successful woman changing the world, there's often a team of other amazing women supporting her and some really good men too.
Yes.
That's fantastic. I'm grateful to you for sharing that because again, I know a lot of people who do work that's really important to them emotionally, like the work that you're doing. It can be hard to make sure that you also keep the time and space to take care of yourself. When you are trying to make the world a better place, for lack of a better term. And I know that in addition to the incredible social work career that you've had, you also have a side hustle, which is coaching people on how to be more mindful consumers. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it means to be a mindful and conscious consumerism coach?
Yes, of course I can. So I do wanna circle back and just say too that I think even though what I get to do in working with survivors, I am also filled by them, and so I just wanna mention that, I'm really I I get drained from it just because it's emotionally draining, but not because I don't love working with that population. They're so filling. Um, and it's just such a fulfilling thing to do. So just want to mention that as well. But being a conscious or mindful consumer coach, I just recently started that November of 2020. Have I started kind of digging more into exploitation within the fashion industry. Like I knew about it. Obviously, I had been for several years been a conscious consumer, but I started learning about last year during the pandemic how brands started canceling their orders from factory workers, which means that orders that had already been completed, orders that brands had placed with factories, um, they had canceled them and they were already either in production or already produced. And that meant that because brands were canceling them, they weren't getting paid. And so then factory workers weren't getting paid and they were getting laid off, and for work that they had already done. And so that was like, what? What's going on? That's not right.
Well, and just to jump in quickly for anyone who's not familiar with the garment supply chain, and please correct me if
Hmm.
I misstate any of this, but so for a lot of different brands, so some brands own their factories, and so like the factories that are producing their clothes are like their own, and so like the factories that are producing their clothes are like their own factories, and those employees are their own employees. But for a lot of brands, they outsource the production of their clothes and other goods to factories that they do not own. So factories that then produce clothing, for example, for a number of different brands at the same time. And the situation that you're describing sounds to me like it was primarily the brands that outsourced the production of their clothes that were then canceling those orders and people were being laid off.
Yes. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Yes. So big brands that you can think of that are like, Boohoo, H&M, Zara, other big, fast fashion brands. Those are, Nike. Those are brands that unfortunately had canceled their orders from factories that they outsource to, and so then what happens is brand, and so they upfront the cost of what they had already made and what was already in production, and so that meant they didn't get paid. When the brands canceled the orders, they did not get paid to then pay their workers. So I started just, learning more and more about that, particularly through Remake. And I started learning more about Remake, which is just an awesome organization that is advocating for the rights of garment workers, and just started following them more and decided, like, I just really want to do more. Um, to teach people how to live more consciously and also teach them how to be advocates, because that is exactly what I'm trying to figure out right now. And I have worked on this for years and years, and I feel like people are just so paralyzed by the daunting thought of changing their lifestyle.
Totally. I mean, I think it can be so hard to know where to start, right? Because it feels like such a massive challenge. So what are some of the different ways that you encourage people, like whether like your coaching clients or, people at workshops or even just your friends, what are some of the action steps that people can take to, be part of the change that we would like to see in the global fashion supply chain?
This is a great question because everybody asks it, and this is what I try to go over with my coaching clients. Um, so there are four main things that I like to talk about. Um, the first thing that I just encourage people to do is, like I said earlier, to ask questions, to wonder about where their things were made, to kind of, when they're going through the store, think about like, I wonder who picked the cocoa beans and who then made this into chocolate or whatever. I wonder who picked this thing. I wonder who made this shirt. Like, to ask those questions. To In asking questions, ask about, was this person how much was this person paid? Was it a living wage? I wonder how the brand treats, the factory. I wonder how the factory treats their workers. Um, I wonder if workers have, a say. I wonder if they're like at the decision making table. Um, and because asking questions can just be really powerful and then mobilize us to then advocate, which is something that I tell people, different ways that you actions, to sign petitions, to use social media, to educate their community. And all of these things can feel really daunting. But once you learn to follow the right organizations and people, it starts to become more natural, because you see their if you're active on social media, you start seeing their posts and you start reading more about ways to advocate because they can make it really easy. Um, and then another a big thing that I talk about is supporting organizations doing the work. So if you don't have time to do like the actual advocacy work, then a really great place to start is through your money. If you have the money um, give, even if it's maybe $5 a month, whatever you can budget. I always just say support organizations, and not just with money, but again with those petitions or those emails that you can send off that take 2 minutes to do, and also just sharing about that with your community, sharing about the organization and the work that they're doing. Um, and then, like I was talking about, like we have been talking about, to make conscious purchases, because that really, even though that is not, the thing that's going to change the entire system, it's really important because as consumers, we do have leverage, and we do have voices. And so when we have a collective voice as consumers, we can influence brands, but not if we don't do the other three steps. So shopping consciously is really important, and that is another motivator for us to continue to change our lifestyle and change the system. But again, we have to continue to do those. We have to continue to be conscious consumers while doing the other three steps.
Totally, totally. I mean, I think so often people do think that it's like really just about what they buy. And like, and I know that you're someone who's very like vocal about the fact that like it's often more expensive to be a conscious consumer. And there are many other steps that you can take that are not necessarily like quote unquote expensive steps. So, like asking these questions, being an advocate, like taking the time to send an email or to sign a petition, and then potentially donating time or money to some of the organizations that are really advancing the cause. You mentioned too that there are like a lot of people to follow, and so I would love anyone off the top of your head. I know you're like such a wealth of resources, and definitely at the end of our conversation we'll make sure that people have the info to follow you, but who comes to mind as some of the key kind of like accounts, or places to get information for anyone who's interested in being more of an advocate?
I would love to share this information. Remake, I just mentioned a few minutes ago. I'm a Remake ambassador, and it's so fulfilling. But they're a great account to follow, especially on Instagram. They have great articles on their website as well. So Remake is a big one. Labor Behind the Label is another organization that I follow. Clean Clothes Campaign. You can add that to whatever you want, Liz. But she's on Instagram and has really great, simple slides to follow. Elizabeth Klein, Aja Barber, the Awaj Foundation. There's so many others I could list, but all of those are really, really great places to start.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll make sure to include links to these in the show notes too, because again, I know you're a wealth of knowledge on this. And I feel like I could keep asking you questions basically forever. But in the interest of time, I'd love to ask you just a few kind of like more quick hits type questions, for a little bit more of like you as a person and some inspo. So I would love to hear if you had like one piece of advice that you would give your younger self, and you can like pick an age or it could be like age agnostic. But what would be the advice that you would want to give your younger self?
Oh, yeah.
Your younger self.
Oh, yeah. Um, I was actually recently looking at a picture of me when I was, I think, 15 or 16, and it was a tragic picture of my awkward stage. And it was just a reminder of like, oh man, I was uh, struggling at that point. I think as any, teenager at 15 or 16, I think most of teenagers feel like, what am I doing? What's going on with my body? What's going on with my life? And so I think I looked at that picture, and think about this question. And I think to my 15 or 16-year-old self, I would say that Your love for people is powerful, and it will be the driving force of your life and your career. Um, but also that nothing is worth sacrificing your life and your career. Um, but also that nothing is worth sacrificing your physical health, your spiritual health, your mental health, and that the most important thing is to invest in these to keep you from burning out, and to invest in yourself and in your relationships, um, because that's what will keep you going and keep you healthy. Um, your career can be important to you, but it can't be over all of those other things, or else you're really going to burn out.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is such wise advice. Although I can say at least for me, my 16-year-old self would have been like,
Yeah, same.
And then what is your favorite inspirational quote right now?
Oh, this one has been my favorite for maybe 2 years now. But peace in me, peace.
We have to fill up our own cups in order to be able to create the change that we want to see. And that if we're burnt out and depleted, or not peaceful, that like we're really not doing anyone a service.
Right. Yeah, and I think I would add for telling my 16-year-old self, I think I would add, like, you deserve to take up space in this world, your voice and, physically, you deserve to take up space and your voice matters. Um, and you can ask for help and you can accept that help. Um, yeah, I just I just think that's hard for me even now. So just starting young at 16 to tell, me that you deserve to take up space in this world.
Yes, absolutely. I love that so much. All right, three more questions. What are your favorite things to like do for fun and for self-care? I know you mentioned kind of like your team and the do for fun and for self-care. I know you mentioned kind of like your team and the people supporting you and keeping your cup full, but like if you were going to have like a fun random Saturday, what would be on your agenda?
Oh, I have a long list of these, but I love to read. I love nonfiction and fiction, but I really love to escape through fiction. So I read a lot of books. Um, I love to ride my bike. I really love riding my bike. Um, Yoga, running. I love camping, go on a lot of camp trips. Um, Face masks. I love face masks. Not the ones that we have to wear for COVID, but the ones where you get to pamper yourself. Um,
Important distinction.
right. Friends, and good wine and good whiskey.
Ah, love it. It's we're talking in the afternoon for me, so it's a little early for wine or whiskey, but
It's 5 p.m. here.
love it. Okay, well, so my one of my favorite questions on like any podcast is I used to listen to the Tim Ferriss show. I don't listen as much now, but he asks everyone on his podcast, like if you had a billboard, what would you put on the billboard? And for me, I feel like so many of the women in my world, we are like are crazy. I mean, I am a crazy person, and I write post-it notes to myself. I'm currently sitting like surrounded by inspirational messages on post-it notes, and so you can totally bring back anything that you've already shared in our conversation. But I also am curious, like if you were gonna like have a post-it in a stack of inspirational post-its, you got to have like one message. What would be your inspirational post-it note message?
Yeah, I think
What would be your inspirational post-it note message?
yeah, I think without a doubt it would be you deserve to take up space.
I love it. As you said that, I was like, that's going on the post-it note.
I'm sure I've written it on many Post-it notes.
That's amazing. Well, then I guess the last thing before you share how people can get in touch with you is what are you looking forward to the most right now? What are you excited about?
Oh, the start of a new season of my life. I am so excited to meet new people, um, to learn from and grow with, and also just, deepen my relationships with my friends and new coworkers. I just am really excited to, yeah, to just engage with more people. I think for everyone, COVID has been, so I think just starting this new season is just going to be really helpful to be with people physically and meet new people because it's one of my favorite things to do. So that's what I'm looking forward to right now.
So fun. I'm so excited for you. And I'm sure people listening right now are excited for you as well. I'm curious if people wanted to kind of like follow along with the mindful consumer coaching tips in your journey, where's the best place for people to find you?
Yeah, the best place for people to find me is Instagram. Social media is not my strong point, so I only have one, and that is Instagram. And so I share on there ways to advocate, different sustainability tips. I really try and show people where they can look, like posting, about those organizations that I shared about earlier. And yeah, I just really try to give people a way to safely learn because I know sometimes, shame can be thrown upon us for not knowing what we don't know that we don't know. So I just try to create a safe space for people there.
And is the best place for people to find you on Instagram? Is it the Mindful Consumer Coach is your handle?
That one, yep, and my personal one, which is Melanie Conover.
Awesome. And we'll link those too. Well, I'm sure this is the first of many of these conversations that I would love to have with you as things continue to unfold. But thank you so much for making time to share the work that you do, to share your story, to educate people about human trafficking and what we can do to address human trafficking and exploitation, and to be more mindful consumers. I know I learned a lot and I really appreciate it. So thank you. I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for making time.
Yes, thank you, Liz. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast. Please rate and review the Women Changing the World podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes. You can find me on Instagram at liz.best, B-E-S-T, or by searching my name on LinkedIn. You can also sign up for my 3-day personal branding challenge, which is totally free, by visiting my website, which is Elizabeth with an S, ELISABETH, best, BEST.com/personal branding challenge. See you in the next episode.